The message came through in the family group chat, short, formal, and signed with my brother's name. Family meeting. Sunday. Everyone attends. I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Family meetings in our house weren't conversations, they were trials. And I was always the one in the defendant's chair. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I had never been the one with the corner office, the trophy spouse, or the glossy magazine spreads. I was the one they whispered about over wine. The broke one, who'd chosen the wrong path in life. What they didn't know was that I could have bought the table they'd be sitting around, the house too, without making a dent in my bank account. I'd kept that part of my life locked away, out of their reach. But this time was different. The reason for the meeting was obvious. My parents' health had been slipping, and the care they needed wasn't going to be cheap. I could already hear my brother's voice, clipped and heavy with pity, telling me to just contribute what you can manage. My sister would nod with that smile she wore when she thought she was being generous. I'd endured their sideways glances, their little gifts meant to help me get back on my feet, and their annual retelling of the "remember when you" stories designed to keep me in my place. I'd played along, let them believe their version of my life, because it was easier than handing them the truth. But that was about to change. Not in the way they'd expect. Not in a way they'd be ready for. Because this time, I wouldn't just show up at the meeting. I would arrive in a way they'd never forget. And the sound of my arrival would shake their confidence right down to the bone. If you've watched up to this point, tell me where you're watching from. And make sure to hit subscribe. I'll be sharing more of my personal experiences here every single day, and you don't want to miss it. When I finally typed, "I'll be there," and hit send, I felt the first spark of something I hadn't in years. Anticipation. They thought they knew exactly how Sunday would go. They had no idea what was about to land in their front yard. In our family, worth was measured in titles, salaries, and how often your name appeared in the society pages. My older brother had ticked every box by the time he was 30. Corporate boardrooms, tailored suits, weekends in the Hamptons. He was the son my parents liked to accidentally brag about to their friends. My younger sister found her place differently. A wedding gown that cost more than my first year's rent, vows exchanged with the heir to a banking fortune, and a life built inside manicured estates. Charity luncheons, designer handbags, first-class holidays. She was the daughter my parents pointed to when they wanted to show how it's done. And then there was me. I didn't fit into their mold, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to. I didn't dream about corner offices or finding a husband who could take care of me. I wanted to build something of my own, even if it meant failing 100 times before it worked. From the start, my choices baffled them. When I skipped the Ivy League applications to work on a small online store I'd started in high school, my father sighed like I'd just wasted my future. "Cute hobby," my mother called it. "You'll settle down eventually." Every holiday turned into a polite intervention. My brother would lean back in his chair and advise me to apply for a junior position at his firm. My sister would offer to introduce me to a few eligible bachelors so I could stop worrying about bills. They weren't worried about me. They were embarrassed by me. The day I left home was the first day I felt like I could breathe. My whole life fit into 2 suitcases, and the wore an envelope in my bag holding just over $200. My father didn't even say goodbye at the door. He just muttered, "You'll be back within 6 months." But I never came back. I learned quickly that dreams didn't pay rent, and ambition alone couldn't fill a fridge. I took on temp work, odd jobs, anything that would keep me afloat while I built my ideas in the quiet hours no one saw. What they never understood was that I didn't leave to run away from them. I left to run toward a life where I could define success for myself. And somewhere deep down, even in those lean years, I promised myself that if the day ever came when they looked at me like I was worth listening to, I'd make sure it was a day they'd never forget. The first business I started barely made enough to pay for groceries. I poured my heart into it, stayed up nights tweaking every detail, only to watch it crumble within a year. I tried again, different idea, different strategy, and that one failed even faster. Each time I lost more than money. I lost a little piece of the belief that maybe my family had been wrong about me. But something stubborn inside me wouldn't quit. I took freelance projects no one else wanted. I learned skills I'd never imagined needing: coding, sales pitches, handling angry clients at 2 in the morning. Every no I heard felt like it carved me sharper, stronger. There were nights when I sat in my tiny apartment eating instant noodles, wondering if this was just going to be my life, hustling for scraps while my siblings enjoyed champagne on yachts. I kept going anyway. The turning point came from an idea I'd been sitting on for years. A security solution for small businesses who couldn't afford the big-name systems. I built the first version on a second-hand laptop with a cracked screen, and to my surprise, it caught attention. Clients started referring friends. Then a major industry site featured us. Growth was slow at first, then sudden. Within 3 years, I had a team, a real office, and contracts I used to only dream about. When a larger firm came knocking with an acquisition offer, I almost didn't believe the number they were saying out loud. By the time the deal was done, I was worth more than I had ever dared to imagine. But I didn't buy a mansion. I didn't fill my closets with labels or trade my old car for something shiny. Instead, I chose quiet wealth. I traveled when I wanted, stayed in places that gave me peace, and funded projects that mattered. Schools in rural towns, programs for single mothers starting businesses, community health initiatives. Things I could touch and see changing lives. And through it all, I told my family nothing. It wasn't just about privacy, it was about protection. The moment they knew, everything between us would shift. Every word, every smile, every invitation would be weighed against what they thought they could get from me. So I kept my secret close. Let them think I was barely getting by. Let them believe their help was the only rope keeping me from sinking. Because when the time came to show them the truth, I wanted it to land with the kind of impact they'd never forget. It was late afternoon when my phone rang. My brother's name flashing across the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail. Calls from him were rarely warm. They were updates, requests, or reminders of my supposed shortcomings. His voice was steady but clipped. "It's about Mom and Dad." The words that followed felt heavier than usual. Mom had fallen and broken her hip. Dad's memory lapses were getting worse, faster than anyone expected. They'd reached the point where daily care was no longer optional, and the kind they needed wouldn't come cheap. "We'll need to discuss the options," he said, his tone carrying that faint edge of pity I'd grown used to. "Of course, we know your situation. Just contribute whatever you can manage. Every little bit will help." There it was. The assumption laid bare. That I'd come back, sit quietly, and let them take the lead because I couldn't possibly do more. I told him I'd be there. I didn't explain how much I'd already done in silence. The research on top facilities, the quiet arrangement with a care agency ready to step in. I didn't tell him that paying for it all, without blinking, was well within my reach. A part of me wanted to say it then, to let the truth hang in the air and hear the pause on the other end of the line. But another part, the wiser part, told me this wasn't the moment. Revealing it over the phone would be too easy for them to brush off, too simple to twist into something else. No. If I was going to show them, it had to be face to face. In a way they couldn't ignore, couldn't explain away. That night, I sat by the window of my loft, city lights flickering in the glass. I thought about every family gathering where my worth was measured against theirs. I thought about the gifts meant to help, the job offers disguised as charity, the way they'd spoken about me when they thought I couldn't hear. And I thought about my parents. Their voices softer now. Their bodies more fragile, but still the same people who had shaped my childhood. Whatever I felt about my siblings, I wanted the best for them. Yes, I'd go home. Yes, I'd sit through their speeches, their unspoken judgments. But this time, when the moment came, I wouldn't leave as the afterthought. This time, they'd see me for who I truly was, and the sound of it would echo long after I was gone. The morning I was set to leave, I stood in front of my closet and ignored the sleek luggage lined neatly in the corner. Instead, I reached for the old canvas duffel I'd had since my 20s. Frayed at the seams, zipper a little stiff. The one my brother once joked looked like it had seen better decades. From the wardrobe, I picked clothes that had long since lost their shape. Faded jeans, a cardigan with a missing button, scuffed flats. I swapped my structured leather tote for a modest handbag with worn straps. Every choice was deliberate. It wasn't that I didn't have better. It was that they expected me to arrive looking like I couldn't afford more. And for now, I wanted them to keep expecting it. On the flight, I tucked into a corner seat and looked out over the clouds. The hum of the engines gave me space to think, not just about what I was flying into, but about the years that had led here. Being underestimated had been both my armor and my burden. In business, it worked to my advantage. People let their guard down around someone they thought was small, and I used that to close deals they never saw coming. But with family, the underestimation cut deeper. It wasn't strategy there, it was dismissal. I could still hear my sister's voice from one Thanksgiving years ago, whispering to her husband while passing me the breadbasket. She tries, bless her heart. I remembered the Christmas my brother gave me a prepaid gas card, sliding it across the table like he was handing me a lifeline. I thanked him then, just like I'd always thanked them, even when the gesture carried more condescension than kindness. They had built a version of me in their heads, the sibling always on the edge of needing help, and they never bothered to check if it was true. The seatbelt light flicked on as the plane began its descent. I pressed my palm over the worn strap of my handbag and felt a quiet steadiness settle in my chest. This visit wouldn't be about proving my worth in their language. No grand speeches or desperate attempts for approval. When the time came, I would let my actions speak in a way their years of doubt could never talk over. For now, I would step off this plane looking exactly like the person they thought they knew. And then I would watch their faces change. The taxi slowed in front of the house I'd once run up to after school, my backpack bouncing against my spine. The white siding had weathered a little, the shutters looked freshly painted, and the maple tree out front, the one I used to climb, still stretched its branches over the lawn. Nostalgia tugged at me, but it came tangled with the tightness in my chest. This was where every holiday dinner had doubled as a status report, and where I'd learned my place in the unspoken family order. The front door opened before I reached it. My brother stood there, one hand resting in his pocket, the other holding the door frame like a gatekeeper. His eyes scanned me from my flats to my worn cardigan, and a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You made it. We were wondering if your flight got delayed." The pause left room for the other meaning, or if I couldn't afford the trip. I stepped inside and hugged him lightly. The flight was fine. I didn't give him anything more. The house smelled like home. My mother's lavender cleaner mixed with the faint scent of roasted chicken. She was in the kitchen, moving slowly but smiling wide when she saw me. "You look healthy," she said after a beat, the way people do when the compliment they wanted doesn't quite fit. "Are you managing all right with groceries?" I kissed her cheek. "I'm fine, Mom. Tell me how you've been since the surgery." I let her talk, nodding, while my brother hovered nearby, adding in medical terms and making sure I knew he'd been handling things. Dinner was just the three of us. The chicken was from a meal delivery service, one my brother had arranged. He made a point of mentioning it as he served the plates, as though a reminder that he could provide the good stuff. The conversation skirted around tomorrow's meeting, but never strayed from its undertone. He was in charge, and I was here to nod along. I didn't argue. I let him keep his script, because the longer they believed I had nothing to offer, the heavier the impact would be when I finally spoke. Later, lying in my old bedroom with its faded curtains and creaky floorboards, I stared at the ceiling. I could almost hear the laughter from years ago, my siblings talking in the hall about how Allison means well, but tomorrow that sentence would never finish the same way again. The next afternoon, the sound of tires crunching over the driveway gravel pulled me to the window. A glossy black SUV rolled to a stop, sunlight bouncing off its polished surface. My sister stepped out first, wrapped in a camel-colored cashmere coat, her hair swept into a style that looked like it had its own team of caretakers. Her husband followed, juggling a cluster of designer shopping bags that matched neither in size nor practicality. She moved toward the front door, with the kind of entrance meant to be noticed. "We're here," she called, her voice already carrying that bright note of self-congratulation. Inside, hugs were exchanged, air kisses planted, and soon the gifts began. For Dad, an expensive bottle of aged whiskey. For Mom, a silk scarf in soft jewel tones. For our brother, a leather-bound planner embossed with his initials. Then it was my turn. She handed me a small bag with a folded receipt still tucked inside. Inside was a gift card to a mid-range clothing store, the kind that offered professional basics in muted colors. I remembered last time you were here, you mentioned needing a few more polished pieces, she said sweetly, as though she were doing me an immense favor. I smiled as if it were the most thoughtful thing I'd ever received. Thank you. That's considerate. Dinner that night was a bigger affair, all 5 of us around the table. The food was rich, the kind you take small bites of, because it's more about presentation than appetite. Conversation, as always, was dominated by my siblings' triumphs. My brother's latest promotion, my sister's fundraising gala that had brought the mayor to tears, her husband's golf tournament win. Each story landed on the table like a trophy. When the spotlight briefly turned to me, it came with a tilt of my sister's head. And what about you? What's keeping you busy these days? I took a sip of water before answering. Oh, just some small business work here and there. Keeps me occupied. My brother leaned forward slightly. I might know someone who could use a few basic website updates. Nothing big, but it could give you some steady income. I thanked him as if I were grateful for the thought, even though I could have bought his entire firm and doubled his staff. The night went on like that, their voices weaving a tapestry of success, each thread carefully placed to remind me where they believed I stood. And I let them believe it, because tomorrow they'd see the difference between the story they told about me and the one I had been quietly living. The conversation shifted after dessert, as it always did when there was serious family business to discuss. My brother straightened in his chair, his voice taking on that clipped, professional rhythm he used in boardrooms. We've been looking at options for Mom and Dad's care, he began, glancing at my sister like they'd rehearsed this together. The best facilities, naturally, don't come cheap. My sister nodded, her wine glass turning slowly in her hand. We've narrowed it down to a couple of premium places. Wonderful medical support, private rooms, beautiful grounds. She said it like she was describing a resort package. I listened, watching the way their eyes flicked to me now and then, not to include me, but to measure how much I was absorbing. Then came the part they'd been circling toward all evening. We think it's only fair, my brother said, that everyone contributes according to their means. We know your situation is different, so we're not expecting you to match our contributions. My sister added quickly, even a small amount would be appreciated. A token, really. We just want everyone to feel part of this. A token. Like a child at the grown-ups' table, allowed to place one flower in the vase after the bouquet had been arranged. I kept my expression neutral, nodding as if their kindness was touching. Inside, my pulse was beating in my ears. Not because I couldn't give, but because they had already written the ending to my story, without even asking for the truth. Mom's sigh cut through the room. She patted my hand and looked at me with a mix of sympathy and disappointment. You've always had so much potential, she said softly. I just wish you'd finished that degree. You could have been so successful, like your brother. The words landed heavier than she probably intended. My brother sat a little taller. My sister sipped her wine, eyes fixed on me in a way that almost dared me to defend myself. I didn't. Instead, I let the silence stretch just long enough to make them wonder if I was hurt. The truth was I wasn't hurt anymore. I was past that. I was waiting. Because tomorrow in that same living room, they wouldn't be talking to the version of me they'd invented. They'd be meeting the woman who could change the entire course of this conversation with one sentence. And she was done asking for a seat at their table. By morning, the living room had been transformed into something that looked more like a corporate conference than a family space. My brother had set up his laptop on the coffee table, a portable projector casting neat slides against the far wall. The title read, Parental Care Options and Financial Planning. Mom and Dad were settled in their chairs, my sister and her husband side by side on the love seat. I was given the ottoman in the corner. Low, wobbly, and just far enough from the coffee table to make note-taking inconvenient. A small, unspoken placement. My brother cleared his throat and began. I've narrowed our choices to 3 facilities that meet our standards. His voice was clipped and confident, like a man who had already decided. Each slide showed a high-end residence with manicured lawns, polished common areas, and smiling staff in pressed uniforms. He spoke about private suites, gourmet dining plans, and on-site specialists. The costs were displayed in discreet font at the bottom of each page, numbers that would make most people swallow hard. My siblings didn't flinch. The message was clear. This was the level of care they believed our parents deserved, and it was the standard they would fund. I noticed how he kept saying "we" when discussing the plans. We'll arrange for, and we can cover the difference. Always plural when speaking about decisions, but never once turning to me for input. Even my sister, when she chimed in, said, "We thought it best to keep them near us. It'll be easier for us to visit." No mention of whether I could or would visit, as though my presence was irrelevant to the day-to-day. They didn't mean to be cruel. In their minds, they were simply accepting what they saw as fact, that I was on the periphery, a sentimental presence at best, and not a serious part of the planning. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, my expression polite but unreadable. I let them talk, flipping through their printouts, nodding at the right places. Inside, I was taking measure, not of the facilities or their amenities, but of just how firmly they believed in the story they'd written about me. And the longer I let them finish uninterrupted, the more certain I became that the moment to correct them would need to be big enough to erase every assumption in one blow. So I waited, because the next time they'd look at me in this room, the conversation wouldn't be about what I could manage. It would be about what I had already decided. My brother clicked to the final slide, the one with his preferred facility highlighted in bold. "This," he said, "is the best option. We'll need to move quickly to secure the unit before someone else does." My sister nodded. "We've already spoken to the director. All that's left is finalizing the payments." She glanced at my brother, and he gave the kind of pause meant to invite me in, but only so they could check the box of having included me. "So," he said, "what do you think you can contribute? We understand your situation, so even a small amount." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "I'll cover it." The room went still for half a second before my brother laughed lightly, the kind of laugh people use when they're sure you're joking. My sister smiled indulgently, as if I'd just said something quaint. "That's generous, but," my brother began. "No," I said, steady. "I mean all of it, every cent, for as long as they need it." The laughter faltered. My sister tilted her head, still wearing that fixed smile, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "That's sweet, but let's be realistic." And then, before I could answer, the sound came. At first faint, then growing louder, a steady, rhythmic thump in the air. My brother frowned, glancing toward the window. The sound deepened, filling the room until even our father looked up in confusion. The thump, thump, thump became unmistakable. A helicopter. I stood, smoothing my cardigan as I walked toward the front door. Through the glass, the blades were catching the sunlight as the aircraft hovered low over the lawn, its shadows stretching across the grass. The pilot lifted a hand in greeting. I stepped outside, the wind from the rotors tugging at my hair. Without rushing, I waved back. Then I turned to see my family standing in the doorway, my mother clutching the frame, my sister's mouth slightly open, my brother blinking like the light had changed too fast. "Let's go tour those care homes in person," I said over the sound of the blades. "I think it's time we made some decisions together." The pilot gestured toward the open door of the helicopter. I took the first step forward, pausing just long enough to watch the look on their faces shift. Confusion folding into realization into the first flicker of something they'd never shown me before. Respect. And just like that, I climbed in, knowing that the conversation we'd have once we landed would not be the one they had planned. It would be the one I'd been silently preparing for years. The helicopter lifted smoothly into the air, the thump of the blades fading into a steady hum. Across from me, my brother sat stiffly, his hands clasped tighter than necessary. My sister kept adjusting her coat as if that could hide the flush rising up her neck. The silence was heavy enough to feel. They were both processing, and neither seemed sure where to start. My sister broke first. "Well, this is certainly unexpected." Her voice was too bright, each word stretched thin over something sharper. "You could have told us you had means." "Would it have mattered?" I asked quietly. Her mouth opened, then closed again. My brother cleared his throat. "We're proud of you," he said, the words awkward on his tongue, as though he'd skipped a few steps in getting there. "We didn't realize things were going so well for you." I met his eyes. "You didn't ask." He looked away, pretending to focus on the view below, fields and rooftops passing like an old patchwork quilt. Mom sat beside me, her hand resting on my knee. Her expression was harder to read. There was pride there, yes, but threaded with something else. Regret, maybe, for all the years she hadn't quite seen me for who I was. "I'm glad you've done well," she said softly. "I just wish we'd known sooner." I didn't tell her that sooner would have meant endless questions about my choices, or that the moment they knew, the way they looked at me would change. That was why I'd kept it quiet. Instead, I kept my voice calm. "It's not about the money. It's about making sure you both have the care you deserve. I'll handle it." My sister shifted in her seat. "We've been managing things because we thought you couldn't. We didn't mean to." "You meant what you believed," I said, cutting her off gently. "And now you know better." The rest of the ride was quieter. No more talk about token contributions or what I could manage. No more offers of secondhand advice disguised as help. When we landed near the first care home, I stepped out first, letting the wind whip around me. I didn't look back to see if they were following, because for the first time in years, I wasn't trailing behind them. I was leading the way. The conference room at the care facility smelled faintly of fresh paint and coffee. We sat around a polished table while the director went over services, costs, and timelines. My siblings listened, but their usual authority was gone, replaced by a careful, almost hesitant quiet. When the director finished, I leaned forward. "We'll take the 2-bedroom unit with the garden terrace, full medical coverage, private nursing rotation, and a dedicated memory care specialist for Dad." My sister blinked. "That's the premium package." "It's the right one," I replied, "and I'll be covering the expenses, all of them." The director nodded, making notes. My brother shifted in his chair. "You don't have to." "I know I don't," I said, meeting his eyes. "I'm doing it because they're our parents, and this is what they deserve." There was a beat of silence. Then I added, "And from this point on, when it comes to their care, we make decisions together. Respectfully. No more assuming who can or can't contribute." The words hung in the air. My brother's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. My sister leaned back slightly, her gaze fixed on the notepad in front of her. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the shift they felt, but didn't quite know how to name. The years of subtle jabs, of being spoken over, of having my place assigned without my consent. That dynamic was gone. Mom reached across the table, her fingers curling gently around mine. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick. "I'm sorry if we ever made you feel less." I gave her hand a small squeeze. "It's in the past. What matters now is that you and Dad are cared for." The paperwork was signed without another objection. The director excused herself to begin preparations, and for the first time in years, the room felt still. My brother finally spoke. "We misjudged you." His tone wasn't easy, but it was honest. "You did," I said simply. "But now you know who I am." No raised voice, no pointed gloating, just the truth, steady and undeniable. As we left the facility, the late afternoon sun spilled across the lawn. My siblings walked beside me instead of ahead, and though no one said it outright, the air between us had shifted. They would never see me as the broke one again. The air was cooler near the helipad, the wind from the blades carrying the scent of cut grass and open sky. Mom stood beside Dad, their hands linked, both of them smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. Not just relieved, hopeful. I had already seen their new home on the inside, every hallway bright, every room designed for comfort and care. But I wanted them to see it for themselves. Not from brochures or descriptions, but from their own seat on this flight. Behind us, my siblings lingered. They weren't filling the silence with their usual commentary. There were no more quiet laughs at my expense, no subtle glances over my clothes or my luggage, just quiet acceptance, and maybe, for the first time, a hint of respect. As the pilot signaled we were ready to board, I felt the weight of the years settle in a new way. Being underestimated had been my shield for so long. It gave me space to grow without interference, to build a life on my own terms. But it had also been a wound, one I had carried quietly, letting it shape my resolve. I thought of the dinners where my voice was an afterthought, the helpful offers that came with pity folded neatly inside, the way they had spoken about me instead of to me. All of that had brought me here, to this moment where I didn't have to explain, argue, or prove. I simply showed them. Mom turned to wave as Dad stepped toward the helicopter. Dad's grin was wide, boyish, as the rotor wash lifted his hair. I followed them in, glancing back one last time. My siblings were still there, watching. Not with disbelief anymore, but with the understanding that the story they'd told about me all these years was gone. The blades spun faster, the world blurring beyond the glass. And as the helicopter lifted, I felt the kind of lightness that comes from carrying nothing but the truth. They thought I came here broke. I left with their respect, and my head held high. If this story touched you, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever been underestimated, like and subscribe for more true family revenge stories.